and start recording. And apparently the system now tells you all that it is being recorded. So that is our official call to order. I'll do roll call of our members. Marty Lawrence,
Present.
Bob Proctor,
Yo.
Kate Tyrion,
Present.
Kurt Vaughn,
Here.
Howard Buchanan,
Here.
and Carolyn is here too. And I appreciate very much all of our guests, and by way of introduction, even our Flood and Flow members, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and what they do in addition to Flood and Flow. And I will go in the order of the boxes on my screen. Ruth Ann, since apparently I forgot you last time, they're going to make you first this time. So please introduce yourself.
I'm Ruth Ann Lefevre. I'm from Sonoyta. I am on the Santa Cruz County Advocacy Group for Formosa Project South 30. Our name is horrendous, I think. But anyway, I'm on that committee, and discussing different kinds of water issues is what I'm interested in.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. Bob?
I am Bob Proctor. I'm the president of Friends of Sonoyta Creek.
And Greg Olson, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Greg Olson, a hydrogeologist with the Coronado National Forest.
And our speaker today. Thank you, Greg. Shelley, who we now all know is in Boston today.
Yeah, back in Boston. Hi, all. I'm Shelley White. I'm a professor of public health and sociology, and I've been running educational programming in Patagonia for many years and just spent my sabbatical year there. Yeah, sad to be back home and missing you all.
Thanks, Shelley. Howard?
Hi, I'm Howard Buchanan. I work for Tucson Audubon Society as watershed specialist.
Thank you, Howard. Sarah Richmond, please.
Hi everyone, Sarah Richmond. I'm in permitting and environment. I work for South 32.
Thank you, Sarah. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Tolina. I own property on Harshaw Road, and I'm developing it into a community center, meeting place, camping spot, things like that.
Thank you, Mary. And Kurt, please.
Kurt Vaughn. I'm a member of the Flood and Flow Committee, and I'm executive director for Borderlands Restoration Network.
Thank you, Kurt. Kate?
Kate Tyrion, Flood and Flow Committee, partnered with Borderlands Restoration Network and Deep Dirt Farm, formerly Institute.
Thank you, Kate. Ali Riza, and apologies if I mispronounce your name.
It's totally okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Ali Reza, and I'm an internship at Next Gen Engineering.
Oh, okay. Yes, I had a note from Bill, and thank you. Welcome.
Correct. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Marty?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marty Lawrence. I manage the Sonoyta Creek Preserve for the Nature Conservancy here in Patagonia, and I'm also a member of the Flood and Flow Committee.
Thank you, Marty. And Peter Lederman?
Good morning. Just getting everything connected here. Yeah, Pete Lederman with Nature Conservancy. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. And I'm Carolyn Schaefer, chairperson of the Flood and Flow Committee and a board member with Patagonia Area Resource Alliance. And next we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand if you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, the first item on the agenda is correction and or approval of the June 10th meeting minutes.
This is Howard. Motion to approve.
Thank you, Howard.
Marty, I will second.
Thank you, Marty. Howard has moved to approve the minutes. Marty has seconded. Are there any discussions or corrections to the minutes? Pausing long enough for opportunities. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes pass unanimously. Call to public. Is there anybody who's with us today who wishes to say something to the committee? Okay, then we will move on to old business. Howard, would you please give us a status of the notice of funding opportunities for FMA and BRIC grants?
Okay, the BRIC grant, which is FEMA, sponsored through the Department of Fire and Forestry Management at the state of Arizona, has no information, no new information.
Thank you, sir. If you would just move on to the next one, the funding for the Watershed Management Group, please.
So this is in reference to a grant to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for the establishment of a watershed management group for the entire Sonoyta Creek watershed. And we received word about 10 days ago that our grant was not selected for this cycle. So we have an opportunity to meet with representatives from the Bureau sometime in August to get more information about why our grant wasn't selected. The meeting is contingent on the idea that we want to apply again. So looks as though most participants want to move forward with applying again, although I haven't spoken to everybody. But assuming that's the case, we'll know more in August or September.
Howard, is it appropriate? You know, it sounds like this is a decision, so I would move that the Flood and Flow Committee does want to continue to pursue this, and therefore that the meeting in August be arranged. Is there a second for that motion?
I
second it.
Okay.
I third it. Speaking with other organizations who've received the grant, they have stated that some of them had a number of applications before they were approved. So we just have to keep on pushing and keep on working at it.
That's good input, Bob. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion for us to declare our intent to proceed with that, please? Oh, Bob, yes, you want to say something?
Aye. Oh, I'm
Oh, that's
agreeing.
an aye? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. We shall proceed. All right, the next item is the Town of Patagonia Municipal Supply Watershed Plan. And once that's established, then working with the Forest Service on a memorandum of understanding and watershed restoration action plans. So the research team of Howard and Bob and I have met discussing this and other agenda items. So I'm going to ask Bob for input. Okay, all right, don't look so surprised. Jump in when you want. I will just say that our discussion, the watershed management action plan is what your research team views as the very important next step. And what we have been discussing at our last meeting is that who are the individuals who would be on that group to help us draft a watershed management plan. It can't be more than the three of us in terms of the individuals who are on the Flood and Flow Committee. But others from each of these organizations could be a part of that watershed management plan. So you may very well hear back from Bob, Howard and I that, we would be interested in someone from the Nature Conservancy and someone from Borderlands to also be participating in this. Fortunately, between Howard and Bob, they have a lot of networks within water management coalitions, et cetera. And I think the team we bring back to all of you will be a good team. Bob, you want to add anything to that, or Howard?
I'll say that if the members of the Flood and Flow Committee could review the last 4 pages of the Patagonia Business Plan, which talks about the water, and to review that, and if you have any input, it's an ongoing thing, and so we need your help, and thank you.
Well, I just want to clarify, Bob, though, that I think you're referring to the general plan, which we're going to talk about under new business. But they are all related. And Greg, if it's okay with you, you were next up, but why don't we go ahead and slip into the town's general plan that Bob just mentioned, because the update on that is that Howard and Bob and I had also discussed the general plan, and we had mentioned this at the last meeting. And the general plan is more of a project than we thought. And we view the watershed management plan as the priority. And given, everybody's time and to-do lists, we cannot handle both simultaneously. So we intend to proceed with working on the municipal supply watershed, and in conversations with the town manager, have determined that there is no rush to do that, because the general plan under Arizona statutes is fine for about another 9 years. And the town's planning and development committee, they've been in that review process for about a year. So we don't have a short timeline to review that. So what we are suggesting is that the research team is going to focus its time and its energy on the watershed plan, and then come back to the general plan. So the general plan will go quiet for a while. Bob, was there stuff in the general plan specifically that you want input for our municipal watershed plan work?
Not at this time, not today,
Okay.
I don't think.
Well, then that kind of takes care of all of our agenda items. Does anybody have any on the committee have any questions about the watershed plan or the general plan? Okay, then I will introduce our speaker today, Greg Olson. As he said, hydrogeologist with the Forest Service, Coronado. And I always enjoy working with Greg. I am looking forward to his presentation. Just earlier this morning, Greg had also sent me some handouts, which I'll share with the committee members later. So if we succeeded in the Zoom world, Greg, you should be able to share your screen, and please start your presentation. And thank you very much for being here today and sharing your knowledge about the watershed.
Right. Well, I'll try to get the screen sharing going, and good morning, and thank you for having me back. I appreciate working with the group. Let's see. So can somebody indicate whether or not they're seeing the screen, the presentation?
It looks good, Greg.
Okay, it's kind of hard for me to tell on this side.
I know.
Okay, so what I wanted to do, or what I was asked to do I believe, was to update the committee on our progress with the Harshaw Watershed Monitoring Program. I think I introduced some of this information, probably most of the information that I have today, probably was introduced last year. But we're finally on the cusp of being able to implement this plan. And so I'll just refresh everybody's memories and add some additional detail that I didn't have back then. So with that, I'll just move into the presentation, and hopefully I can figure out how to make everything work properly. So thanks for bearing with me. And just one moment while I do this. Okay. Right. So hopefully the next slide has come up. Okay. So the objectives are to increase the awareness of our program that we have here, inform you of what we perceive as the purpose and need for the Forest Service for this Harshaw Watershed Monitoring Project. I will very briefly, in 3 slides, talk about the water balance approach, as ultimately that's how the information can be best synthesized into information that all parties concerned can use. I'll describe some more details about the plan since it's all ready to implement now, and I'll update you on the locations, the instrument types, and where we are at with the approval of the plan with our internal procedures for any kind of land disturbance on the forest. And then I also want to explain how we anticipate being able to distribute the data and how often. So that's what we'll go through here in the next few minutes. The Forest Service is a multiple use agency. As you all know, we have many users that use the forest lands for different purposes. And our mission is to manage those uses and conserve the resources, and with providing those services to the users. We recognize that there are public and private interests concerning Harshaw, specifically the Harshaw watershed, and the Forest Service is the largest landowner within that watershed. And so the opportunity to collect data just based on area alone is on Forest Service lands. And so that's part of why we're taking this initiative. We want to collect hydrologic data so that all parties have timely access to factual, objective, scientifically that meets scientific standards for water resource information collection, and provide that information on the Forest Service lands. Ultimately, I anticipate that watershed water balances will be developed. Probably a number of parties will do this external of the Forest Service, but it's the intent of the watershed group to utilize this information, try to synthesize it into a watershed water balance, and we think that that will bring some clarity to how the watershed functions. I'm just going to throw in this non-endorsement statement that we often in government have to do. I'll be presenting some slides that have specific instruments in it and certain software that's all proprietary. And therefore, I just want to present this as that we're not able to, and we're not intending to endorse any of these products, but they are the products that we plan on using. So if we go into the watershed water balance approach, you can boil it down to a very simple approach like this. It's presented in just Wikipedia. Our input to the watershed all comes from precipitation. And the water that falls on the watershed can leave in one of four ways, essentially. Well, in three ways it leaves the watershed, in one it accumulates in the watershed. So precipitation can take the form of storage and stay in the watershed, in that it can replenish and increase groundwater levels. It can increase water levels in reservoirs. And it can only leave the basin in basically three ways, and that is evapotranspiration from the vegetation and the surface, water surfaces, evaporating that, and then it leaves the basin through the atmosphere. It can leave the basin in two other ways, and that is through surface runoff on our streams, and then through the groundwater avenue, which we don't readily see. So in the water balance, all of these parameters are in flux all the time, and it changes with our climate, our droughts, our wet periods. All of these things change. And the result of what we see on the surface expression through things like stream flow and our riparian areas is a result of where that system is right now. So we're all familiar with the hydrologic cycle. And the question is, let me see here just a moment. So the question is, how do we measure all of these things so that we can develop a water balance and understand all the major elements of the precipitation that falls on the watershed, and then the storage change, and the three methods by which water leaves the watershed. So when we get into water balance modeling, there's a lot of tools out there. It can vary anywhere from the back of an envelope to a spreadsheet analysis. One of the tools that we have access to and plan on using is a statistical program called GoldSim. GoldSim was initially used for water balance modeling, but has branched out into many different social applications of statistical analysis of data. And the purpose of it is, in this context, is to break down the watershed into enough components and look at each component on a statistical basis, knowing that each parameter can have changes in it that vary within certain limits, and then allow the model to change all of those values and generate what is the best or the most likely outcome in the future of water balance as it changes, and each one of these variables has error associated with it. So it kind of constrains how far the results of a water balance model can be. So there'll be many water balances that probably will come out that use a single value, a a mean value, etc., and then everything is calculated from it. A product like this or a program like this can look at it more in a statistical approach and try to indicate, well, how reliable is the number and how much could it vary? So ultimately, the data hopefully will go into this kind of tool. Now, this map, I apologize, there's a lot of land area out there, and trying to depict all of the watersheds, the sub-watersheds, which the Harshaw portion of the watershed, as it is defined at the boundary of the Forest Service, is this area here. So the only difference between this and other entities perhaps modeling this watershed is to bring the watershed pour point down to Sonoyta Creek, and therefore you gain this part of the watershed. So it's relatively a small area compared to the rest of the watershed. So our program is actually going to address just visually here, 90% of the watershed or so. And this figure, I've provided Carolyn with a copy of this figure in a 11:17 format. It should be in a JPEG, so you should be able to bring it into any picture viewer and be able to enlarge portions of it to see in more detail, because there are overlapping, there are locations where the instruments are so close to each other that they overlap. I've also provided her with a list of latitude and longitudes for each well and instrument that we have in this plan. And there's a legend down at the bottom that explains the different instruments that are depicted on the map. So this will be a little bit familiar to some folks in that the types of instruments and how many are approximately the same as what we spoke about a year ago. And that is that we have, we plan on having a total of 7 stream gauges out in the Harshaw watershed and shown on that map. One of them is already installed and has been operating pretty consistently for about 3 years now. And for quite some time, efforts were made by the forest to monitor this perennial site, and which is shown on the map as well. And with varying amounts of success and periods of time, the placement of these instruments in a dynamic, flashy watershed such as Harshaw is a real challenge. As most of you know, a lot of times it's flowing very low or not at all in many reaches, and then other times it's pretty high catastrophic kind of flow. So what we've done is, in a bedrock portion, we have drilled a hole into the bedrock and placed one of the logging instruments. So it is capped with this stainless steel flange, and that protects the instrument from all the damage that can occur from, essentially large cobbles and small boulders being transported down the stream bed. So there will be approximately 7 in total. And again, those are depicted on the map there. At the same location where the existing site is on Harshaw, USGS has offered to install one of their video stream gauges. The one that you see here is actually out on Alum Gulch right now. And this is this is a new technology. It varies from the traditional USGS stream gauging in that it uses a camera and stores video clips. And then those video clips of the stream flow are analyzed, and they can do particle tracking within that video clip and determine the water surface elevation and the flow velocity, and therefore determine the discharge of the stream. So that will supplement the data that we get from our primary existing gauge. And this will be very helpful because it can sometimes be difficult, if not impossible, to measure the flow of Harshaw Creek when we have stream depths of 10 or 12 feet and the water is moving 10 miles an hour, very powerful and very difficult to get measurements. We do have tools to do that, but then it's actually getting out there at those times. And many times we can't get to this site because there are low water crossings that are impassable. So anyway, the video gauge here will help us fill in that void in some of the information that to increase the accuracy of our gauge rating. Along with the stream gauges, we intend to put in some piezometers, which are very shallow wells. Essentially, they'll just go down to as far as we can get them above the bedrock, but they'll be in the stream bank. And what this will help us measure is the amount of water that ends up being in bank storage during high flow conditions. During high flow conditions, the stream level is high, water will infiltrate the stream sediments on the banks, and that adds to groundwater recharge. And then it also adds to releasing that water in the following hours, days, and weeks following a storm. It's released as a bank flow. So this will help us get a handle on what the levels are in the soil banks, stream banks, along the stream corridors. Then we'll have a one weather station. It's located in the approximate geographic centroid of the watershed. It's a little bit north of where it would be ideal for that, but it's about 2,000 feet north of where the basin centroid is. It is still at approximately the mean elevation, and it's placed in a location where the vegetation and soil type is similar to one of two prominent soil and vegetative types in the watershed. So it really characterizes the weather and the soil and vegetation conditions in an area in a single location that is representative of a good portion of the watershed. And you can see here the parameters that it will collect. This data will be collected at 15-minute intervals, and it's reported to a cloud service for storage on an hourly basis. And it does that with a cellular phone link. Okay, then there'll be two independent rain gauges to increase our coverage of the watershed, since rainfall is can be very different, both in timing and the amount of rainfall from place to place. And so we'll have two more rain gauges. One will be above at the very upper portion of the watershed. The other one will be down near the Arizona Trail. So we'll have coverage in the south, middle, and north ends of the watershed. And that will help us, especially along with some radar data. We should be able to get a good ground truthing of the amount of water and the amount of precipitation and how it's distributed across the watershed over time. Then groundwater is the portion of the equation for the water balance where we can have storage and release of water that is in longer term storage. And so we've identified about 8 wells that are owned by the Forest Service and are accessible. There may be more, but we know that there's at least these 8, and they're pretty well distributed across the watershed. They are concentrated more near the streams, simply because they wanted to minimize how deep they had to drill the wells. So economic and also needing just where they would most likely have a successful well. So again, it doesn't necessarily reflect groundwater in the higher elevations, but with some reasonable assumptions about groundwater elevations and how they generally conform to the land surface are reflected by the topographic surface. We should be able to have at least a better picture of what the groundwater table looks across the watershed. For surface water quality, and we know that there's a lot of historic mining. The Patagonias are rich in sulfide minerals. These sulfide minerals can generate acid and release metals, as many of you know. And so we will get some information on water quality. This part of the program is the first portion, which is collecting field water quality using an instrument, which can give us the temperature, the pH, the conductivity or the total dissolved solids, and then the dissolved oxygen, which is important to wildlife. All of these parameters are actually important to wildlife use. So we'll be able to collect that fairly often, and at locations. Initially, we'll probably focus on the gauge locations, the 7 gauge locations, but that can always be expanded for a period of time if there are certain issues or areas that we want to get more information on what the water quality is as it changes throughout the watershed. The laboratory analysis, we don't actually have a firm budget for that, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to collect a number of surface water samples and groundwater samples over the years that the program is in place. And but it would be focused mostly on the metals and then the general water quality parameters that water quality is determined on for basically for potability and also for wildlife uses, because the priority pollutants or the water drinking water standards do not necessarily address all the wildlife issues out there. There are species that will be much more sensitive to certain parameters than humans will. So we will try to get a handle on that. That's part of managing the resources on the watershed. And the forest has worked on cleaning up quite a number of mine sites out there and that are in forest lands. Many of you know about the Lead Queen mine. That was addressed a couple of times, and hopefully there's a fix in there that will be successful. This past year, last fall and winter, I believe. We had 3 of the mines in the very upper portion of the watershed above the Hermosa property that were cleaned up by our abandoned mines group. And there are reports available on that, on those projects as well. We'll also put in a photo point program where we will come up with fixed locations to take regular photos from. So that will give a certain view of areas that we can go to and be able to compare over time the changes in the watershed appearance, the vegetation, the stream morphology. Those types of things can be documented photographically. So we'll establish those sites as well. Now, as far as data, we will be using predominantly the ADQ and USGS and EPA protocols for all of our data collection. Our data quality objectives, our processing and storage will be unique to the watershed just because we'll have to store it using our own facilities. There may be an option to upload data to both ADQ and the EPA's water quality storage sites. They're not really intended to store. They're more for water quality and laboratory analyses than they are things like weather data and flow data. But that may change over time, whether or not there's a archive available through one of the other agencies. But we will certainly be having the data in an archive on forest storage, computer storage. So the new data sets that come in, we hope, and my colleague Pete Christensen will probably take care of most of this because he does that for our in-stream flow program that covers other areas of the forest, streams on other areas, and uses the same kind of data. And frankly, Pete will probably be the researcher, the manager of this program not too long from now, as I approach some retirement date. So Pete will be likely the person that will be picking up all this. And just to let you know, he's been involved with all of the site selection, the instruments. He'll be involved with putting them out there and the maintenance and data collection. We really work together hand in hand on this. And so he's fully up to speed with everything that's here. So as far as distribution of the data, I have no indication that there's anything other than as we make the data available, and when we do that, it certainly will be, there'll be the caveat that it's preliminary or subject to change. And the reason why most agencies do that is because, especially even if you go to like USGS, they'll put out provisional data. And the reason that they do that is that if they get information that allows them to recalibrate, and this happens all the time with stream flow, recalibrating and then reprocessing the stage data so that your flow data in CFS, cubic feet per second, is more likely to be higher accuracy than that. So we always want to leave some room in there to make adjustments and republish the information as we can find information that increases confidence in that data. So to update everybody on the project implementation status, all of the instrumentation that we have here, all the loggers, weather instruments, etc., that's all been procured and is ready to go. And we have identified very specific installation sites now, and we've made sure that one, the Forest Service owns the land, and two, that especially cultural and wildlife resources have been consulted as to what our ground disturbance and our, for instance, for wildlife, our noise disturbance in putting this program in. We've gotten clearance on the cultural. We did have a request from them to move the one site that's just above the Harshaw Town site, moving that upstream about 80 feet, just to allow a little bit more buffer for the cultural items and cultural features that are down there at the Harshaw Town site. And then for wildlife, their only concern was that if we used any larger power equipment that was noisy, like for instance, if we used we can use quiet generators, the very small wattage and quiet generators, that's no problem. But if we were going to use anything that's more on a chainsaw level kind of, and we're not planning on using any chainsaws, but anything that is loud, gasoline powered equipment, any kind of auger, power auger, or anything like that, that they would ask to have us check with them first and make sure that we're okay with Mexican spotted owl and yellow-billed cuckoo. So for noise sensitivity. And those are the only two issues that have been identified, and we are incorporating that. We have incorporated that. Where we are at in the approval process is that all the specialists have been put in their input. We anticipate having the final paperwork signed by the district ranger. Of course, it's pending her approval, but all indications are is that this is all supported, and so we would expect that paperwork will get finalized. But once that's done, that signals our Pete and I can start putting the equipment out. So the initial installation of all the equipment, except for the piezometers, we think it'll take about a month of 1 or 2 days a week of installation out there to get all the instrumentation installed and up and running. So that's kind of the time frame for getting the loggers up. The piezometers, because the yellow-billed cuckoo and Mexican spotted owl, if we do end up having to use any kind of power auger type of assistance to get those put in, we might have to wait on that until fall or winter, just to avoid disturbing them. All right, so in summary, the Harshaw Monitoring Program is it's intended to collect comprehensive sets of hydrologic resource data on the forest for a variety of land management purposes and provide this data in a timely manner to interested parties. The monitoring program will provide high frequency and quality measurements of all portions of the hydrologic cycle. And these data are key to understanding the hydrology of the watershed. These data can be ultimately used for a watershed water balance. And we expect to be able to start getting these instruments out last month or next month rather. And of course, I was hopeful that we would have gotten them in last winter, but that's moving at the speed of government, I guess. So that concludes my presentation information that I have here. I'm happy to address any questions that have come up, and would invite those. And so I'll stand by here a moment, and Carolyn, perhaps you could facilitate any of any questions that come this way. I don't know if you use chat or anything like that, but I'm not seeing anything like that. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to stay here and answer those. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg, very much. As I say in every meeting, water is life, and it is our #1 priority. And I appreciate that the Forest Service has been responsive to the requests over the last year or so in moving this forward. And thank you for your efforts in doing that. Greg, you had mentioned a link for reports on the remediated projects, and I would like to have those to share with everyone. And as I said, when the recording of this meeting is uploaded, I will share the recording as well as the 3 documents that Greg has already provided. I will include his email address for any questions, but please, anyone who has questions now or wants to say something, you can speak up.
This is Bob Proctor. Greg, the report on the 3 mines that were cleaned up in the Harshaw Creek, where can those be available? Where can I find that?
Yeah, so yes, I've made a note to do that, to get what information I can on that. I may have, it's possible I've jumped the gun just a tad on that. So the way these CERCLA projects run is they come up with a engineering and remediation plan, and that is based on identifying the mine waste materials, sampling it, and defining what the cleanup project is and the design for the cleanup project. Those reports certainly do exist right now.
I saw the information on the project or the scope of the project, but I didn't know how much had been accomplished, and I understand that there was still some amount of tailings that still had to be collected and taken care of. So I was wondering what the status of what they had done so far.
Well, so I haven't, the information that I know of right now is that to my knowledge, the 3 sites, the Blue Nose, or anyway, I'm not going to get the names right, so I should probably stop there. But the 3 mines that were cleaned up over the winter, as far as I know, that work has been completed. The roads and access have been, the road upgrades that they needed in order to get the trucks in have been reclaimed, obliterated. And so I do know that there is a shared project down on the 3R mine, which is not in the Harshaw watershed. And that one is I believe that's in conjunction with ADQ. But some of those tailings will be moved, I believe, onto Forest Service lands in order to affect the remediation at the 3R mine. And I believe that there's that's patented claims, if memory serves. And so it's one of these things where multiple agencies are trying to, affect a cleanup there, but there's public and private entities that all have to get on the same page in order for it to work. My understanding is that's either done or is in process. and that'll be good. I remember working on that project back in the early 90s, actually. But what was proposed back then by some miners never came to fruition. But in any event, so and then there's the Lead Queen mine, and so usually what there is that there'll be a follow-up after these circle actions to document the cleanup, and that's probably the reports that I'm saying should be available. I don't actually know if those reports have been, if those are available, so I need to check on that.
Okay.
But certainly the engineering, the pre-work and the design of the program, those, which basically tells what contaminants are there and where they're located and where they're going to move them to, that kind of thing, that would be in the plan, and there's I know there's documents of those.
Okay. And then the monitoring project on Harshaw, is that what is the projected life of that project? Is that going to be ongoing from here on out, or is that just a few years?
So there isn't a defined end time. My expectation is that we are probably looking at something measured in certainly a 10 years. I can't see it being any shorter than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on the results of that, it would likely continue. But I guess what I would say is that there is no commitment by the forest to any specific timeline right now. My understanding, my belief, and all is that this will continue to be supported for the foreseeable future. So there is no specific time frame set at this point.
Is there any projection by the Forest Service to expand the monitoring project or program to the full Sonoyta Creek watershed?
I'm not aware of any effort for that kind of program.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I understand the interest and the sole source nature of the water supplies to Sonoyta and Patagonia. I understand the interest in that. I'm just not aware of any program that has been talked about for the
I only
water.
was mentioned that, and assuming that the Sonoyta Creek watershed does contribute to the, the Santa Cruz watershed, and as the demand for water will increase in the the metropolitan areas and along the Santa Cruz Valley, that the water that comes from the Sonoyta Creek watershed will probably become more valuable, more important to those municipalities downstream.
Mm-hmm. Yep, understood. It, we're all becoming very aware of our dependence on the historic amounts of rainfall that we've had, and our reliance on things like the Central Arizona Project water for the larger municipal areas. And yeah.
I would assume that as the Patagonia Municipal Watershed and the future Sonoyta Creek Watershed Management Group would be interested in monitoring the different areas of Sonoyta Creek Watershed. And I would assume that the Forest Service may be willing to expand the monitoring programs under a watershed restoration action plan, or a number of them. It's a possibility.
Excuse me. If you're asking me if it's a possibility, I would say, yeah, it's certainly the question is always personnel and funding.
Right.
And now, certainly there's an opportunity for watershed groups to install, and other agencies to install equipment on Forest Service lands with a special use permit. So that's also possible to secure agreements to permit other entities to put instrumentation on Forest Service lands. We did that when I was at ADQ. We would have to get special use permits to put some of our equipment out. And then there's also memorandum of understandings that are more used these days, but for those two agencies. But certainly the possibility of a watershed group, especially one that's got grants, and it may not even matter if it's publicly or grant funded through public monies, but certainly any group, any organization like that could apply. We have individual researchers that ask permission to establish sampling or monitoring of various wildlife and other resources across the forest, and they secure a special use permit in order to make sure that they have official approval to do that. The issue comes down to is if somebody leaves equipment on the forest and they don't have a special use permit, legally our law enforcement folks can tag that equipment, can remove and impound that equipment. It's just a matter, it's just how we have, it's the tool that we have to use sometimes in order to address things put on the forest that nobody had permission to put it there on it for a long time. So
one last question: as far as requesting the data from the monitoring program on Harshaw, does that have to be annually, or will that just be automatically sent to the town of Patagonia or the Flood and Flow Committee, where then it could be distributed to interested parties in the area?
Well, so I'm not aware that we've put together anything formal on that. I know that Pete Christensen, as he assembles and does the quality control on batches of stream flow data that we're currently collecting out at Harshaw, I think he just finished another data set and sent that out to people that have registered an interest in receiving that information as it becomes available. I don't really know what the schedule will be. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet. But I can tell you that we recognize for this data to be of reasonably, to be of high quality, we have to go out there every 2 to 3 months and service the gauges, the instruments that we have out there, make sure that they're running properly, and extract the data out of them, because they do fail, and it's just really bad news when we have an instrument fail out there. And it's not like we have redundancy built into this. So we service these instruments put fresh, expensive, most of the best batteries that we can find to put in them, and handle them gingerly and everything, and then we keep our fingers crossed. So what it comes down to is, when it comes to servicing these instruments is, well, how much data are you willing to lose by not going out there? And then there's the limitations on how much we can put in there to resources to keep up on it. So right now we do it about twice a year at Harshaw. I anticipate that we're going to move all the instrumentation in Harshaw to a higher frequency, probably quarterly. And then, once we collect it, it's great. We've got the data. Then it's a matter of finding time in our schedule to process the data and then publish it. So I'm thinking, I would think about it maybe being turning into an annual data package. It certainly might be an option to do it on a 6-month basis, but that depends on the personnel availability and other demands on the staff. There's really only
Thank
three of
you.
us. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Good questions. Anyone else have questions for Greg? Ruth Ann, is your hand in the air?
Yes, it is. I'm a little concerned. I'll ask the question that you actually asked, is how reliable are the numbers of the modeling systems that are used? It seems like there's different modeling systems. The mine uses one. The flood and flow committee who hired some hydro, they had a different modeling system, and then you have the Gold Sim. And so I'm wondering, is there any differences, or how is it resolved to find out that the numbers are accurate or not?
Yeah, that's a pretty, so that's I'm not trying to avoid the question at all. It's that some of these errors first of all, every number that is generated has a certain amount of error around it. Like, for instance, you have a thermometer in your house on your thermostat. It tells you that it's a certain temperature in there, but there's an error around that. And it could be biased high or biased low. And so there's accuracy and precision with all of these measuring tools. But what we're trying to do is move away from these broad brush assumptions that many of the modelers are using for, like, for instance, recharge.
Yeah.
They'll take a number that is published in a map someplace that is a 30-year average with all kinds of assumptions in it. And then they're using a single number, which may or may not be reality for this watershed. And it's certainly not going to be accurate when you get down to a time scale of, well, how was this year compared to last year? So when we have models that are using data that uses a lot of assumed information, then that's when these models end up having, there's opportunities for them to be incorrect. I'll use an example. So I've noted a few of the models that have been presented. They'll talk about using a USGS data source called StreamStat for their storm flows. And what I found that couldn't really tell was, for instance, well, I use StreamStats all the time. It's one of the best. It has saved so much time for me and in the kind of work that I do, just countless hours of time that has saved me. But there'll be a value at a particular point in a watershed where, there's a 10-year flood event or a 50-year or 100-year flood event. But really, when you go into StreamStats, it actually gives you a mean value, and then there's a lower prediction limit and an upper prediction limit. And the thing is that those are very wide. They are 40 to 50% different, and or more. A lot of times I was looking at one for a watershed I'm working on right now, and the 100-year flood is 6,000 CFS, but the upper prediction limit is 11,000. So if I'm trying to predict whether or not there's a risk of flooding for a facility, I'm going to use the upper prediction number because, we're talking about life and property there. It's certainly valid to use the mean value in many analyses. It's the best number. It's statistically the strongest center value of it, but not understanding how far it could be different from the value that they're using is important. And that's when we creep into the differences in the different models. So it all depends on the assumptions of the analyst and whether or not they are noting the error that could be involved. I'll just leave you with one more example because it's pertinent to this particular study that are monitoring. So when it comes to evaporation rates on an open body of water, the standard instrument out there is called pan evaporation. And basically what that is a 3-foot diameter galvanized steel shallow dish. And it fills up with water, and it's filled up with water. Some of them fill automatically to a certain level each day, and then it measures how the evaporation, if you put when you have a plant saucer out on your porch and it gets water, well, a few days later it's gone. Well, it's all gone to evaporation. So, and that's essentially what this does. So the error that creeps in there is that the temperature of the water in this galvanized tank is not what it would be on a pond. The pond has got circulation, it's receiving colder groundwater, etc. So the evaporation rate is not really what the instrument, the pan evaporation that everybody is using. So it's just another example. We're not using pan evaporation. We are using what's called the Penman-Monteith equation in order to calculate what the open surface water evaporation would be. So that's yet another model, another approximation that is, is not, it's been found to be accurate, but it has a certain amount of error around it. Yeah. So that's what we struggle with all the time. And so I think it's important that us as the Forest Service, when we present this information, that we say, yes, this is the data that we have, and also say, here's the unknowns about that information. Yes, we're going to generate a specific number. every number that's out there has a certain amount of confidence or error in it. So, and so some of those numbers matter and some of them do not matter as much. Yeah. So sorry if I went on too long.
No, that's all right.
Are you complete, Ruth Ann? Okay, and Greg, thank you. Actually, you didn't go on too long and your answer was excellent for the world is ambiguous. So thank you. Anyone else have a question?
I'm not putting my hand up, but I have one. This is Marty Lawrence. During your presentation, you had a slide referring to the lab analysis of the waters for various metals, but it stood out to me that you mentioned, should funding still be available, they'll continue to do those analyses. I was just curious if the funding source for that particular aspect is any more or less susceptible to being pulled when you least expect it than other aspects of it, or if that was just my assumption upon reading that.
Yeah. So right now, those kinds of things are done as our watershed manager's budget has money for. If we're finding that we don't have money in our specific budget, then we can request a allocation of, additional funds. But that each one of those occasions is a decision made by somebody in the organization. And, frankly, when we have a big, and it also depends on the time of the year. This is becoming a little less, they've changed the funding on the Forest Service in recent years, and it's a phased in change in some aspects. But essentially what happens is we'll have a big fire year, and then they'll come, the agency budget folks will comb through the budgets of every program on every forest across the nation, and they do what's called a sweep. And basically they say, okay, you haven't spent this money, we have a need for it on something important and urgent and public safety. And so sorry to say, but that money is now being reallocated. That can happen anytime. There's no, in this particular thing, it's more or less, it's kind of an elective, not an elective, but to me personally, as a researcher or as a resource specialist, I know that the water quality information will be valuable to future people who are here looking at the information. And so I see it as important. I've put it in there, but it is subject to, there isn't a specific line item that assures that that money will be there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Marty. Funding is always an important question, so thank you, and thank you, Greg.
Mhm.
Anyone else have a question for Greg? Okay, well, as I said, I will send out information, including Greg's contact information, if there are any additional questions. Our next regular monthly meeting is 10 a.m. on Thursday, August 12th. Do any of our committee members want to bring up future agenda items at this time?
I'd like to remind everyone to please review the general plan on water, the last 4 pages of the general plan. It's on the town website, right? And then I'd also like to suggest that we update our parking lot future agenda items in a future time or now or whatever.
Well, We have 7 minutes. What do you want to cross off or add?
The pause program, we need to address that, I think.
Okay,
And the down 1, 2, 3, 4, the town of Pat watershed designation by Forest Service. That can be removed, I believe,
yes,
or
agree.
we can change it to a different word, town of Patagonia wrap or whatever, future wrap. And yeah, those two things at least.
Those are,
And I don't know what the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association is about.
okay. Those are good suggestions. Thank you, Bob. We will put the pause program on the next meeting. And yes, we can change that watershed designation because we have accomplished that. But we know the wraps are in the future, so we will keep that on the parking lot for the future, but change the wording on it. Good question, Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. We'll find out what that might mean. Anybody else have anything on agenda items, including the parking lot? Good input, Bob. Thank you. Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Thank you, Kate. A second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Marty. I was beginning to think we all wanted to stay and sing Kumbaya or something. Thank you, everybody, very much. Enjoy the rain. May there be more. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.